My photo taste is the Pinterest because they are the best.
English.com.
Hello and welcome to 6 Minute English. I'm Rob.
And I'm Neil. Hello.
Hello, Neil. Today we're talking about evolution. Now, the man most people think of when talking about evolution is, of course, Charles Darwin. He was a bit of a genius, wasn't he?
He was. Evolution means the way living things change and develop over millions of years. And a genius has great and unusual skills or abilities in a particular subject or area. Well, Charles Darwin was a clever man, but I happen to know that another man actually came up with the same idea, but many years before he did.
Oh, so how do you know about that then, clever clogs? That's someone who thinks they know everything. What was his name?
Well, his name was Patrick Matthew.
OK, well, we're going to learn more about him on today's programme. But first, can you answer this, Neil? What was Patrick Matthew's job? Was he A, a politician, B, a church minister, or C, a horticulturalist?
Well, I don't know, so I'll go for the profession that sounds most interesting, a horticulturalist. So I'll choose that one. That's a person who studies plants.
OK, we'll find out later whether you're right or wrong. But let's listen now to Dr. Mike Wheel talking about Patrick Matthew. Can you hear the word he uses to mean change-making?
He published a brief outline of the idea of species being able to change into other species through natural selection, this great transformative idea that unites us all in a single tree of life. And he did that 27 years before Darwin and Alfred Russel Wallace did so. And they recognised that he did so, but other people since then have simplified the story and tended to concentrate just on Darwin.
So, Matthew believed that evolution happened by natural selection, and natural selection describes the way that plants and animals adapt to their environment, because some individuals survive and reproduce, and others don't.
And adapt means the way our bodies or our behaviour change to suit new conditions.
And what does Dr. Mike Wheel mean by a single tree of life?
Well, the basic idea behind evolution is that all the different species or types of living thing have evolved from the same simple life form. Just like a family tree describes how the members of your family are related to each other, so the tree of life describes how all living things are related.
So, if this was a transformative or change-making idea, why don't more of us know about Patrick Matthew?
A good question, Neil. We heard in the clip that Darwin acknowledged or accepted Matthew's claim to the idea, but it seems to be down to us, the general public, wanting to simplify things.
Well, I like to keep things simple, Rob.
You don't have to tell me that, Neil. But let's hear more on why Matthew might have been passed over or ignored by some. Here's Dr. Patricia Farrer, Senior Tutor at Clare College, Cambridge. She tells us why Darwin was so successful. And listen out for the word she uses to mean close friends and supporters.
He brought his allies on board, and although he was publishing from his stronghold down in Kent, he had the most famous, most prominent, eminent members of the scientific society in Victorian times who were pushing on his behalf. Having a scientific theory being accepted is not just a matter of whether the theory is right.
The word she used was allies. What are they, Neil?
Allies are people who help or support us in something. Having someone on board also means to have someone's support for an idea or project. And Darwin's allies weren't just mates from down the pub, were they?
No, they weren't. They were famous, prominent and eminent scientists. Prominent means important and well-known, and eminent means important and respected.
Ah, yes, so you could say that I'm an eminent radio presenter, Rob.
Well, I could, Neil, but...
Okay, moving on. These eminent scientists were pushing on Darwin's behalf. In other words, they were taking strong action to promote his theory of evolution.
And it's possible that Patrick Matthew did not enjoy the same level of support.
That could be true. So, do you remember the quiz question from the beginning of the show, Rob?
Indeed I do. I asked, what was Patrick Matthew's job? Was he A, politician, B, a church minister, or C, a horticulturalist?
And I said C, horticulturalist.
Yes, and That was the right answer, so well done, Neil. Just to remind you, a horticulturalist is a person whose job is to study and grow plants such as flowers, fruit and vegetables. But Matthew was interested in trees too. In fact, his ideas about evolution appeared in an appendix, or section giving extra information, at the end of a 200-page book about wood.
So maybe that's why we know Darwin's name, but not Matthew's. It doesn't seem fair.
Oh, well, life's not fair, Neil. You should know that by now.
I should.
So why don't we hear the words we learned today?
Okay, here we go. Evolution. Genius. Clever clogs. Natural selection. Adapt. Species. Transformative. Passed over. Allies. On board. Prominent. Eminent. Horticulturalist. Appendix.
Thank you, Neil. Well, that's the end of today's 6-Minute English. There are plenty more to listen to at bbclearningenglish.com. Please join us again soon. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
My photo taste is the Pinterest because they are the best. Flick to link, a link to flick.
Playwright Adrian Kennedy wrote a volume called People Who Have Led My Plays. And if I were to write a volume, it would be called Artists Who Have Led My Exhibitions. Because my work in understanding art and in understanding culture has come by following artists, by looking at what artists mean and what they do and who they are. JJ from Good Times. Significant to many people, of course, because of Dynamite, but perhaps more significant as the first really black artist on primetime TV. Jean-Michel Basquiat, important to me, because the first black artist in real time that showed me the possibility of who and what I was about to enter into. My overall project is about art, specifically about black artists, very generally about the way in which art can change the way we think about culture and ourselves. My interest is in artists who understand and rewrite history, who think about themselves within the narrative of the larger world of art, but who have created new places for us to see and understand. I'm showing two artists here, Glenn Ligon and Kara Walker, two of many who really form for me the essential questions that I wanted to bring as a curator to the world. I was interested in the idea of why and how I could create a new story, a new narrative in art history, and a new narrative in the world. And to do this, I knew that I had to see the way in which artists work, understand the artist studio as a laboratory, imagine then reinventing the museum as a think tank, and looking at the exhibition as the ultimate white paper. Asking questions, providing the space to look and to think about answers. In 1994, when I was a curator at the Whitney Museum, I made an exhibition called Blackmail. It looked at the intersection of race and gender in contemporary American art. It sought to express the ways in which art could provide a space for a dialogue, complicated dialogue with many, many points of entry, and how the museum could be the space for this contest of ideas. This exhibition included over 20 artists of various ages and races, but all looking at black masculinity from a very particular point of view. What was significant about this exhibition is the way in which it engaged me in my role as a curator, as a catalyst for this dialogue. One of the things that happened very distinctly in the course of this exhibition is I was confronted with the idea of how powerful images can be in people's understanding of themselves and each other. I'm showing you two works, one on the right by Leon Golub, one on the left by Robert Colescott. And in the course of the exhibition, which was contentious, controversial, and ultimately, for me, life-changing in my sense of what art could be, a woman came up to me on the gallery floor to express her concern about the nature of how powerful images could be and how we understood each other. And she pointed to the work on the left to tell me how problematic this image was as it related for her to the idea of how Black people had been represented. And she pointed to the image on the right as an example to me of the kind of dignity that needed to be portrayed to work against those images in the media. She then assigned these works racial identities, basically saying to me that the work on the right clearly was made by a Black artist, the work on the left clearly by a white artist, when in effect that was the opposite case. Bob Colescott, African-American artist, Leon Golub, a white artist. The point of that for me was to say in that space, in that moment, that I really, more than anything, wanted to understand how images could work, how images did work, and how artists provided a space bigger than one that we could imagine in our day-to-day lives to work through these images. Fast forward, and I end up in Harlem, home for many of Black America, very much the psychic heart of the Black experience, really the place where the Harlem Renaissance existed. Harlem now sort of explaining and thinking of itself in this part of the century, looking both backwards and forwards. I always say Harlem is an interesting community because unlike many other places, it thinks of itself in the past, present, and the future simultaneously. No one speaks of it just in the now. It's always what it was and what it can be. And in thinking about that, then my second project, the second question I ask is, can a museum be a catalyst in a community? Can a museum house artists and allow them to be change agents as communities rethink themselves? This is Harlem actually on January 20th, thinking about itself in a very wonderful way. So I work now at the Studio Museum in Harlem, thinking about exhibitions there, thinking about what it means to discover art's possibility. Now, what does this mean to some of you? In some cases, I know that many of you are involved in cross-cultural dialogues. You're involved in ideas of creativity and innovation. Think about the place that artists can play in that. That is the kind of incubation and advocacy that I work towards in working with young Black artists. Think about artists not as content providers, though they can be brilliant at that, but again, as real catalysts. The Studio Museum was founded in the late 60s, and I bring this up because it's important to locate this practice in history, to look at 1968 in the incredible historic moment that is, and think of the arc that has happened since then, to think of the possibilities that we are all privileged to stand in today. And imagine that this museum that came out of a moment of great protest, and one that was so much about examining the history and the legacy of important African-American artists to the history of art in this country, like Jacob Lawrence, Norman Lewis, Ramir Bearden. And then, of course, to bring us to today. In 1975, Muhammad Ali gave a lecture at Harvard University. After his lecture, a student got up and said to him, "Give us a poem." And Muhammad Ali said, "Me, we." A profound statement about the individual and the community. The space in which now, in my project of discovery, of thinking about artists, of trying to define what might be Black art cultural movement of the 21st century, what that might mean for cultural movements all over this moment, the me, we seems incredibly prescient, totally important. To this end, the specific project that has made this possible for me is a series of exhibitions, all titled with an F, Freestyle, Frequency, and Flow, which have set out to discover and define the young Black artists working in this moment, who I feel strongly will continue to work over the next many years. This series of exhibitions was made specifically to try and question the idea of what it would mean now, at this point in history, to see art. as a catalyst, what it means now at this point in history as we define and redefine culture, black culture specifically in my case, but culture generally. I named this group of artists around an idea which I put out there called post-black, really meant to define them as artists who came and start their work now, looking back at history, but start in this moment historically. It is really in this sense of discovery that I have a new set of questions that I'm asking. This new set of questions is, what does it mean right now to be African American in America? What can artwork say about this? Where can a museum exist as the place for us all to have this conversation? Really, most exciting about this is thinking about the energy and the excitement that young artists can bring. Their works for me are about not always just simply about the aesthetic innovation that their minds imagine, that their visions create and put out there in the world, but more perhaps importantly through the excitement of the community that they create as important voices that would allow us right now to understand our situation as well as in the future.
Flick to link, a link to flick. My photo taste